Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in May. May was a great reading month. I read 8 books and liked almost all of them. So I'll start with a reread. I've been trying to reread more books this year, and I decided to read The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Speare. I read this back in high school, but I couldn't remember it. This is a historical YA set in the 1600s, and we follow Kit, a young woman who has grown up in Barbados, but is forced to move to Connecticut to live with her aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins. She's very much like the fish out of water. She doesn't really understand New England life. She doesn't understand like the Puritans. She was very wealthy in Barbados, and here she has to like do chores and help with the farm and that kind of stuff. Kit befriends an old woman who lives by Blackbird Pond that everyone thinks is a witch because she's a Quaker. I think on the whole this was an enjoyable read. I really liked the characters and I really liked the setting. But this was published in the 1950s, and I think there's some like wording that hasn't aged well. But on the whole, like I said, it was enjoyable, and if you're looking for kind of like light historical fiction, then you might enjoy this. On to a book that I read for my pop culture osmosis series. I will link that video somewhere, but I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a classic, and it did not disappoint. I loved it. If you're not familiar, it's about a man whose portrait ages while he remains young, and it's about like vanity and like hedonism and corruption and like the importance that society places on youth and beauty, especially Victorian society. I feel like I peeled back maybe 3 out of the 100 layers of this book. I will definitely be rereading it. There are a lot of things to like contemplate and just like a lot of good discussion points. The vlog that I did is very much more about kind of like the surprises reading the book and is very frivolous. But just know that this actually is a really great piece of literature to discuss and reflect on. The next book I want to talk about is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig. So this is an apocalyptic book set on a northern indigenous community, and one day all of their cell phones stop working, and they don't think much of it because they're a remote community. Sometimes things don't work, but then their satellite phones stop working, so they can't communicate in any way with like the closest city to them. Again, they don't think much of it. The power goes out, like just every system starts to fail, and they're just running generators and waiting for things to turn back on. And after a while, it becomes clear that that's not going to happen. And this is right at the start of winter, so they're about to enter a very difficult season. I would recommend this if you like a good slow burn. It really built up tension really well. I loved the build, and I love like the source of that tension. Like a lot of great books about the apocalypse, it's never the apocalypse itself that's really the source of tension. So yes, they are in trouble, but it's not the fact that the power went out or their phones went out or that they're disconnected from the rest of society. That's not the issue. The issue comes from other people. In this case specifically, white people trying to enter the community and the danger that these white people may pose. I thought it had some really great commentary on community and how crucial community is for all of us, but I think specifically for Indigenous community. There are only a couple of things that I didn't like so much. I thought some of the side characters weren't really fleshed out, and I couldn't really differentiate a few of the characters, like friends of the main character. I couldn't really differentiate them very well. And I also thought the ending was a bit abrupt, especially compared to the slow build-up of the rest of the novel. But like I said, I really enjoyed it and would highly recommend if you enjoy apocalyptic books. So the next 4 books I read as part of Asian Readathon. The first book I'll just touch on briefly. This is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I have an entire review of this book, so I will link to that. So I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but in brief, this follows Kathy, who is reflecting on her life and reminiscing about her childhood and the school she went to, and a bit about her early adulthood as well. It's very slow-paced, tense, unsettling, full of nostalgia and longing. This is the dystopian where the dystopian really takes a backseat to the broader themes of the book. The next book I'm going to talk about is Severance by Ling Ma. I am also not going to spend a lot of time on this one because I do intend to film a full review of this book as well. So in short, this is a zombie apocalypse that's really not about the zombies at all. It follows Candace, who's a young woman, and it follows kind of like two different times in her life. So we have kind of like alternating between two stories. The first being when she first moves to New York City to start her career, leading right up to the beginning of the apocalypse, and the other time frame is post-apocalypse when she joins with a band of survivors and they're trying to get to safety. I thought it had a great atmosphere. It was very melancholy. It had this atmosphere of like drudgery. There was a lot of feeling of like millennial disillusion, which really spoke to me. I found the ending like a bit flat, but it didn't ruin the book or anything. And the book overall was like really well paced. Although I would have preferred maybe a different ending, I'll take it because I just love the rest of the book so much. The next book that I read for Asian Readathon is How to Pronounce Knife by Souvankham Thammavongsa. This was a collection of short stories that I didn't really get on with, but I don't want to disparage the book because I do think the writing was really strong. So my main problem was that I found the stories a little bit too short and I really couldn't get into them. I wanted a little bit more breadth, I guess. And when I say short, I mean like some of these short stories were 4, maybe 5 pages, and the font wasn't like particularly small or anything. But boy, were the characters strong. Even in those very short few pages, she somehow managed to always create characters that were very fully realized. And I would like to read something by her that, like a novel by her. There were a couple of stories that really stood out to me and I did enjoy, and those in all cases were the longer ones, and even those ones didn't stick with me long term. There's only one story that I really remember well, and I forgot to mention that all of these stories revolve around like immigrant life in some way. So yeah, great writing, not for me. The last book I read for Asian Readathon was a nonfiction called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by Fadiman. So this I thought was just excellent. It's the story of a girl with severe epilepsy. She was born in America, but her parents are Hmong immigrants. So they immigrated from Laos following the war there in the 70s, so I think they moved in the 80s or something like that. Anyway, it's so beautifully done. It's about really this like clash of cultures, like the misunderstandings between like her parents, between the doctors, between like the society in America, and between like the Hmong society. It really kind of broadens the scope to give you the full context of Hmong culture and Hmongs in America. Even though it's specifically about this one child, it really does give you a really full story, I think. And not only was this beautifully written, but it was done with a great amount of care. It's a very balanced look at what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. There's no blaming here. The doctors aren't painted as bad doctors, and her parents weren't bad parents. The doctors did the best they could to provide the best care for this child, and her parents loved her tremendously and took excellent care of her. But communication and cultural understanding were just not there. And like I said, there was great historical and cultural context provided in this book, because knowing the Hmong people and their culture and beliefs is crucial for understanding how these miscommunications, these misunderstandings happened. And it's a great example of how if you don't understand someone's culture, if you don't understand someone's beliefs, you can't work alongside them. You can't treat them medically. It's not possible to provide the best care if you really don't understand about the person at all. It's a heartbreaking story, but just the writing and the storytelling is just superb, and I would highly, highly recommend this. The last thing I wanted to mention is a poetry collection that I read called 77 Fragments of a Familiar Ruin by Thomas King. These were 77 very short poems, and in some cases just like statements or phrases or thoughts, I guess. I really enjoyed this. I thought the poems were very sharp and witty, and in a lot of cases funny, even when the subject matter was quite dark. Some of the like little statements or thoughts I didn't quite get the point of. I didn't understand why they were there or feel they added anything to the collection, really. Like, as an example, I wrote down number 45 was simply, shopping is good, period. That was the whole of number 45. Okay, you're trying to say something here, I get it, but it's not connected with any of the poems before it or after it. So those little bits I didn't really appreciate, but all of the poems I very much did. There were quite a few recurring themes and storylines that I think he wove together really well. They weren't back to back, but just like peppered throughout the collection, which I think worked really well to continue to bring you back to some of those ideas. There was one that was a more progressive story, which was a sort of retelling of the creation myth of Sky Woman. And I think my favorite kind of recurring story was this one dealing with Fox, who keeps going to doctors, and the doctor will say something like, you have had adverse childhood experiences. That's why you are the way you are. And then Fox will relate the info to Bear and Turtle, I think, some of his friends. And it always ends with this like witty, abrupt little punchline. And then like 10 poems later, there'll be another poem in the same format where Fox goes to a different doctor who says, you know, you didn't have adverse childhood experiences. You have XYZ. That's why you are the way you are. And I loved all of those poems about Fox going to the doctor, and me explaining it is not doing it justice at all. So just read the collection. I will definitely read this collection again. I liked it so much. And there are some other things by Thomas King that are on my TBR that have been bumped up because his writing is just so sharp and witty and funny, but saying really meaningful things. I just think it was brilliant. Those are all the things I read in May. If you've read any of these, please let me know below what you thought of them. I'd love to have a chat in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.